Hey guys, I'm Edd Kimber, the boy who bakes, and I'm here with Guittard today to show you a delicious and very simple cookie recipe. It's a chocolate sablé, which is French for sandy, and it's basically like a posh shortbread. So all we're gonna do is we're gonna take some unsalted butter, we're gonna add that to our mixer. You can do this with a hand mixer as well, you don't need to use a stand mixer if you don't want to. And then along with some light brown sugar, and that's gonna give that really delicious caramelly note. And then a little bit of caster sugar, and that's going to help give us that crisp sablé texture. So all you want to do at this stage is mix that together briefly. We're not making a cake, so we don't need to beat it till it's really light and fluffy. We just want to add a smooth texture and a little bit of air in there. So about 2 to 3 minutes is fine. So once the butter and sugars are nicely combined, we've got everything nice and smooth, and it's just starting to change colour, so it's just gone a little bit lighter than it was before. We're going to add a tiny amount of vanilla extract, so about a teaspoon or so. And that's just going to give background flavour, because obviously this is a really delicious chocolate recipe, so it's not going to be a vanilla taste, but it will add layers of flavour. And that's just the way you take something from simple to really, really delicious. So all we're going to do now is just take a little pinch of flake sea salt, because chocolate really gets brought out and all those flavors come together with a good pinch of salt. Just mix that together. And then we can work on our dry goods. So what we're gonna do is just take a larger bowl, and to that we're gonna add some plain flour, and then some cocoa rouge, which is Guittard's delicious cocoa powder. It's my favorite cocoa because it has such a great flavor, and because it's a Dutch cocoa powder, it also has a really nice fat content, so it won't end up with dry cookies. It's really, really delicious. And then because this isn't technically a shortbread, we're gonna add a little bit of baking soda as well. So we're gonna add 3/4 of a teaspoon, and this will just help give the cookies a really nice, brittle, crisp texture. So it's just the most delicious texture. So all we're gonna do is take a whisk, mix that together just until everything's nicely combined. And then we're gonna add that to the mixer, and this is the really important stage because it's a sablé, that means sandy in French, and so that describes the kind of finished texture of the cookie, but also the texture of the dough. If you mix this too much, you end up with a chewy, kind of almost bendy cookie because you've worked the flour too much. So the key is just to mix these dry ingredients together just until the dough starts to form clumps, not until it becomes one uniform ball. So just add this to the mixer. And then on low speed, we're going to start by pulsing the mixer, just because we don't want flour to go everywhere. So just on very low speed, just pulse that together. And then when it starts to form nice clumps, we can turn that off and then finish it off on the work surface. So at this stage, the dough is still not quite mixed. It still looks a little bit gray. You can tell the butter's not kind of blended fully with the rest of the ingredients. So you still need to mix a little bit longer at this stage. So you can see that with just another minute or so of mixing, it gets darker and it starts to clump in bigger pieces. And that shows you that the butter has fully combined and the dough will now hold itself together. So now we need to talk about the best bit in this recipe, and that is of course the chocolate. So we're using a chocolate that's between 60 and 70% cocoa solids, and that's just my preference. If you want to use a milk chocolate, that is of course fine, but I think the 60 to 70 gives a really nice bitterness to this, and it really helps give a really rounded chocolate flavor. So I started using Guittard after I went to San Francisco and I met Amy, who is the 5th generation of the Guittard family to work in the family company. It's 150 years old this year, and so I really like that kind of heritage. But also after meeting Amy, it's so clear that the company has this enthusiasm and this love of really wonderful chocolate. And so ever since then, I've used their chocolate and I absolutely love it. So today we're using one of my favorites. We're gonna add that to the dough and then just very, very briefly mix that together. So now all we need to do is tip that out onto the work surface and finish mixing that by hand. And the reason for that is we don't want to overwork it in the mixer. So just take that off the mixer. And then what we're going to do is dump this straight out onto the surface. So no being delicate here, you need to tip it straight out. Don't worry if you make a little bit of mess, it's baking, you're going to make a little bit of mess. And then all we're going to do is finish this by hand. So all you want to do is just gently bring it together until it forms one dough. And the warmth of your hands will just finish that off and bring that together into a nice uniform dough. And I would say if you get a few little bits that are kind of disappearing off, don't worry about that too much. It's more important that you get the dough nice and uniform without overworking it too much. If you try and get every last little bit, you might end up overworking this and the cookies will become tough again. So once it's nice and uniform, all we're going to do, take a knife, cut that in half into 2 pieces, because this makes a nice amount of cookies. And then working with 1 piece at a time, you need to form it into a rough sausage shape. So to start with, just use your hands to kind of form it into a nice rough shape. And then once you're kind of getting there, you can then use your hands just gently to roll it. And then once it's almost in the shape that you want, we can then wrap that in cling film and refrigerate that until it's nice and firm. With the cling film on, you can handle it a little bit more and not worry too much about it breaking. So get that nice and tight. We can then put that in the fridge for about 2 to 3 hours until it's really nice and firm, and then we can get on with actually slicing and baking the cookies. And the reason I love this style of cookie is it's super easy. There's no rolling out, there's no cookie cutters, there's no having to form them into rounds. It's just slice and bake. At this stage, if you want to store these, you can leave this dough in the fridge for at least a week, but you can also freeze it. So what I tend to do is slice it once it's really cold and then freeze the whole thing. And that way, what you can do is every time you have a cookie emergency, which is a real thing, you can just take off 1 cookie and bake it off so you have that perfect freshly baked cookie whenever you need it, and it'll keep in the freezer for about 3 months. So once the dough has had a chance to chill and it's nice and firm, we can slice this into cookies. So all you need to do is unwrap it and then take a really nice thin, sharp paring knife. And the reason you don't want to use a big chef's knife is they can be quite thick. When you slice the cookies, they can crumble a little bit too much, so a thinnest knife you have is better. So all I do is slice off the end, and don't worry if they do crumble a little bit, because there's a lot of chocolate in there. They do have a tendency to break up a little bit, but we can press them back together, no problem. So cut them about 1 centimeter thick, and then just place them onto a parchment-lined baking tray. So when you place them onto the tray, just leave 1 centimeter or 2 between each cookie. They don't spread a lot, but they will spread a little bit, so you don't want them to join up as they bake. If you want to be really, really perfectionist with this and you want to get perfectly round cookies, what you can do is bake these inside muffin pans as well. And then when they bake and they spread, they'll hit the sides of the pans and you get perfect circles. But it's a little bit fiddly, and this is just a delicious rustic cookie, so don't worry about them too much. So once those are cut or on the baking tray, we're going to put those into an oven that's been preheated to 180 degrees Celsius or 160 on a fan oven, and they're going to bake for about 10 to 12 minutes. When they come out of the oven, they will look a little bit like they've puffed up a little bit and they won't look fully set. But that's the beauty of this cookie, because when they cool, they get this perfect, crisp, crumbly texture. So 10 to 12 minutes is perfect, and then let them cool fully before you eat them. So once the cookies are fully cooled, they become really nice and crisp, and they'll have this nice snap and crumble. You could happily enjoy those as they are. They are utterly delicious. But if you want to take them another step further, you could half dip them in tempered chocolate. If you want to learn how to temper chocolate, make sure you get back onto the Guittard channel, because there is a wonderful recipe on how to do that there as well. But all we're going to do is take our tempered chocolate, half dip it into the chocolate, and then just give it a little wiggle so the rest of the chocolate falls off, so we only get a nice thin coating, and then place that back onto our parchment. Now, I love the addition of cocoa nibs. So what I'm going to do is just sprinkle a few onto that melted chocolate. They're completely optional. If you don't really like them, that's fine, but I love them. And you can also use nuts, all sorts of different things. So just, again, half dip them in there like that. Give a nice little wiggle to get rid of the excess, and then place that onto the parchment like that. So they are our finished cookies. They are just utterly, utterly delicious. They have this beautiful kind of snap to them, but also this really rich cocoa flavor. And the benefit is they're not too sweet, so they're a little bit grown up.